we are continuing to take a look at the games, the brilliant games of Jose Raul Capablanca. He, as you know, was a wonderful, brilliant chess player and was known for his end games and his technical part. I mean, actually, he was also a very great tactician, but he was lesser known for that and more known for his contributions in the end games. So, let's take a look at this brilliant game. White was Capablanca playing against the very talented Reshevsky. Samuel Reshevsky, as you all know, he was one of the best, greatest chess prodigies, but what happened to him is a very different story. So here we go. It's white. It was black to play in this position, and the one thing that you can learn from this game is the transition that happened from this position. Just compare this position to the position we are going to get five move later, and this is completely different. So black at this position played knight to d7, allowing the exchange of pieces, and just Capablanca played rook takes e7, rook takes e7, bishop takes bishop, knight takes, and you go into this position. And this is the point where you see the brilliant transition that will happen right now. So at the moment, both of them are pretty equalish. It seems that black has absolutely no problems. His pieces are quite active, and I don't see any problem in the black's position. And actually, there is not really any kind of issue with black's position, but the way Capablanca seizes the initiative here is quite impressive. So queen to d4 played. It's a very simple move, attacking the knight, just putting it on an active square, also preparing rook to d1, trying to get the rook in. So let's see what happens next. Knight to d5. Now the knight can, in the future, it can jump to squares like b4 and try to attack the weakness at a2, something like that. Let's see what happens now. Rook to d1 is played, threatening a back rank. So basically right now the knight cannot move simply because of queen to d8, and that will be a serious problem. If queen f8, then we can take the rook. For example, let me just give you an example here. Now if that is taken, then that's a checkmate. And if it's not taken, for example queen f8, then we simply take the rook, easily winning. And that's the reason the knight cannot move at the moment. And so he just continues, black just continues with a simple move, f6, making room for his king, also controlling the e5 square, so the white knight cannot jump onto this. And now finally, or threatening to move the knight somewhere like knight to b4. And this is where you see Capablanca's transition. Knight to e1 is played. Now what is the point of playing knight to e1? Why is this move even played? There are a few points. First of all, opening up the bishop, and the bishop on a8 is not supported, so the knight is again unable to move. It was previously unable to move because of the back rank threat, but now it's again unable to move because the bishop is hanging here. Apart from that, the knight on e1 is actually controlling the c2 square, so there is no chance of invasion. So this is a very clever defensive play from Capablanca's part. So here we go, bishop to b7 is played. Black just protected his bishop and is asking white, how are you going to continue? You have your pieces correctly set up, but what is the way for you to go? So white here played a very brilliant move. Now I want you to just pause the video and try to think, how are you going to play this position? What will you play here? So this is actually a very instructive moment, and Capablanca in this game played bishop takes d5, a very instructive move. Why do you give your bishop, such an important bishop, for a knight? Well, there are a few things happening over here. This knight on d5 is actually quite menacing and actually can quite cause some threats. For example, knight b4, and it's causing attack. It's attacking the a2 pawn. If the a2 pawn is moved ahead, knight simply goes back, and this pawns will be weakened. So the knight can actually cause some trouble. However, the bigger idea is, after takes and pawn takes, now you see the transition is so wonderful. Black has a bad bishop playing against a very good knight. So this is good knight versus bad bishop position. And again, we all know that queen performs better with a knight. Queen and knight pair, a knight is a much better coordinating pieces. They coordinate much better than bishop and queen. So Capablanca is, the position which we had a few moves earlier. Look at this position versus the position we have right now, which is this one. It's completely changed just in a few moves, just in a 3 to 4 moves. The position is completely changed. White is much better here actually, because his position is much superior. This bishop is bad bishop. Our knight will be much superior. He's going to pressurize this guy, blockade it as well, and let's see how this turns out. So obviously Capablanca has turned the board a little bit, turned the turned the game a little bit. So now it was whom to play. What was the move? Just a second. So e3 was played here by white, and black plays queen to e4. Now, would you capture it, or would you play something else in this position? Again, it's very important to play precisely here. If you take the queen, then he will simply recapture, and there will be no structural damage done to black. For example, takes, and suddenly all of his pawns will be connected, and he will have no structural damage. In fact, black is much better here. So going back, remembering that you should not give away such an advantage. This is a weak pawn. You need to keep that pawn weak, vulnerable, and you need to keep targeting those pawns. So white simply plays h4 here. Just gaining space on this side of the board, and preparing to expand on the king side. So a5 being played, f3 again expanding on the king side. We have strong pawns, strong majority over here on the king side, so we should just push our pawns. So f3 being played. Now this forces the exchange of queens. So queen takes d4. Again, going back is not really better. If queen over here, then we can just continue with something like knight d3 or something as such, or just simple move like king to g2 is also very good. Just protecting the g3 and f3 pawn, and that's very good. So black just went ahead, exchanged the queens, and now white should not capture with the pawn, because then his weakness will no longer be exploitable, and that's the reason white should just capture it with the rook, keeping the weakness intact. So we still have his weakness. Giving your opponent weakness is very important, because that means that some of his pieces will remain in a defensive posture. So for example, the pawn on d5 makes the bishop on b7 very vulnerable and very bad. This is going to be hemmed in his own pawns, and he's not going to see the sunlight soon enough. So rook to c1 played, attacking the knight. Simple move, king f2. Uh, Rook to a1 played. Now I'll just pass on the, I'll ask you, how do you play in this position? It's white to play. White has a few moves. He can either choose between rook to e2, or he can also play a4. Which one would you choose here? Again, this is a moment where you have to be very precise. Playing something like a4 is very careless, because after takes, this is a pawn which can be targeted. It is a weakness, and something like bishop c6, and the rook and both of the pieces will attack this vulnerable point. So you should be very careful when you play such moves. This is a very careless move, and that's the reason the correct move here is for white to play rook to d2, just holding on. Now, yes, white has a very active knight, very good knight versus a bad bishop position. But you might ask, black does have compensation here. He has a very active rook, which is actually bothering white a little bit and stopping him from coming forward. So isn't this equal position? Because isn't this, kind of equalish, because black still has activity? The answer is yes, black still has a very active rook, but we are going to deal with that very soon. So here we go. A4 is played, knight to d3, rook to b1, and again I'll pass you the move. What will you play here? Capablanca, realizing that his opponent has only one good thing to be proud of, that is his rook on b1, a very active rook. He realizes that, and he said, okay, let's go for rook exchanges. After the rooks are exchanged, you have nothing better. So this is taken. Actually, there is no other way for black to avoid this. For example, a move like rook to h1, or maybe something like rook a1, for example. We are going to capture here, and the bishop on b7 is hanging, and that's the reason this is not very easy. For example, another move is just rook to h1. In that case, we can go over here, or okay, what can we do? Takes, check, comes down, takes. Even that is fine. We can actually even capture the pawn on a4, and after he gives a check, we're gonna just come down, and once he captures, just knight takes takes. We are a pawn up for free. We are just a pawn up, for, and there is no compensation that black has for this outside passed pawn. So we have a passed pawn here, and that is the reason, going back, yeah, that is the reason he needs to exchange the rooks. Black has to exchange the rooks, so he takes the rook, rook takes b2 check, knight takes, and again we have went through a transition. We have exchanged a pair of rooks, and again, who is better in this position? It's definitely white, because now it's a purely knight good knight versus bad bishop position. So this is exactly what he was aiming for, right after the middle game, and that's exactly what he's got. So he has a blueprint in his mind. He knows what he's achieving, what he wants to go for, and then he just goes for it. He has a plan, and it just somehow works the way he wants. So Capablanca is really wonderful in that way. So now, after knight takes on b2, black plays bishop to c6. Now knight to d3, the knight is planning to go on the b4 square, and trying to attack the bishop, trying to pressurize the pawn. Now g5 is displayed. We're gonna take and play knight to b4, and again, it's not very easy to to exploit the advantage that white has here, to realize the advantage that white has here. After all, black is still not completely lost, and there is no clear way how black is going to lose the game. So, I mean, how white is going to win the game. So he takes the pawn. What will you play here? It's again a you have two options here. You can take the bishop, or you can capture back the pawn. Which one would you choose? Well, if you are sensible enough, you will not touch the bishop, because, for example, if you take the bishop, then simple pawn takes pawn, and it turns out that there is no way for white to stop the pawn from promotion, and that's the reason white has to be careful here, and again capture back the pawn. And now the bishop moves. Even if this is an endgame, endgames has to be played very precisely, and you just cannot afford such mistakes. One mistake and it turns out to be completely lost. So you have to be very precise. Now g4 is played. This is a very, very instructive move. Why is it an instructive move? Isn't this a simple move? It's absolutely not. Generally we are told that we should not put our pawns on the color of the bishop. For example, he has a dark light square bishop, and we should not put our pawns on light squares. For example, three of our pawns on light squares is not a good idea in general chess principles. The reason for that is these pawns are easy targets for the bishop. The thing is, yes, they are targets for the bishop, but also you need to understand what is black trying to do here. In this position, black was threatening to go h5, h4, and then trying to create a passed pawn on the h file, and that was something of a counterplay. And Capablanca or any other positional player like Karpov, Kramnik, Petrosian, they don't give their opponent counterplay. They try to squeeze as much as possible, and that's the reason g4 was played. This is a very practical move, going against the principles, but still a very practical decision, and actually a very, very good move. So black plays king to g7. His plan is very simple. He wants to bring his king to g6, and then push forward with h5, and trying to bring his king from this side of the board. And white now should do something immediate. He has some targets. The pawn on b5 is slightly weak. The pawn on d5 is slightly weak. So one of our plans can be to actually go around here, either target the d5 pawn or target the b5 pawn, and trying to exploit these pawns and trying to get his own passed one. Otherwise, black is just going to come around the board and try to attack our pawns. So black has his way. We should have our own plans. So here we go. King to e2 played. King to g6. Both the sides are going ahead with the plans. Now h5 is played. That's taken. That has to be captured. Otherwise, the pawn can roll forward, and that can get really messy. So we're gonna take it. King takes. As we have said, the king is coming around here from this side of the board, trying to harass our pawns, and we are going either to this pawn or to this pawn. So king to d5, king to d4 played, king to h4. We're gonna capture the pawn. Yes, we have got a passed pawn. Yes, we have got an extra pawn, but he comes for our pawns. Now what are we going to play? Again, this is a moment of transition. Capablanca in the game played a very, very bold move. He played f4, allowing black a passed pawn. So obviously black should not capture the pawn, because that does just turns out to be nothing. But he should push the pawn, which is actually played in the game, and black now has a passed pawn. But whenever you make such a decision, such a crucial decision, you have to be sure that it's well calculated, and there is no, it has to be precisely calculated till the very end. So Capablanca, calculating everything, went ahead with f4, allowed black a passed pawn, and now continued with f5. This pawn is actually a threat. It is going forward. Black has to stop it. He plays bishop to c8, Again, how will you continue here? There are again two or three good moves. You can play king e5, or you can push forward. Pushing forward with f6 is not a good idea because that is very premature, and he can play something like bishop e6, blocking our pawns, and it might not be so easy for white to convert his advantage. That is the reason white has to be careful here. Just prophylaxis. King to e5, control the e6 square and threaten to push forward f6. So black again has to be alert. Black plays bishop to d7. White goes ahead with e4, bishop to f8, bishop to e8. Sorry. Now he basically controls the f7 square, and he has got some control over the squares. And actually, he's just planning to go king f3. Sorry for that. King f3 and pushing his pawns. So king to d4, and this was actually a very interesting moment. Black slipped away here and played king to d4. This is not the best move. In fact, the best move is f6. Nevertheless, there is a long variation, and we are not going to go in that. But king to d4 turns out to be quite interesting. Now, king f3 is played. You can see black is just about to push his pawn. So e5, g3 is played. Now that is a priority. We need to stop the pawn. So knight to e3, stopping the pawn. So whenever he goes ahead, we are going to sacrifice a knight, and after king takes, we will push forward a pawn, and this duel will face against the bishop on e8. So let's see what happens now. King to f4 played. This pawn is attacked. This pawn is attacked. Which pawn will you push forward? Well, if you are clever, you should push forward the pawn on pawn to e6. This is the correct move. Pushing something like f6 is not really a good move because he plays, something like bishop f7, controlling the light squares and making it again very difficult for white to convert the advantage. And that's the reason white has to be clever and play e6. Black now goes ahead and plays g2. This has to be captured, and here he takes. So Capablanca has came forward till this point, and he has played very well. Yes, he's got an extra pawn, and this is actually a very winnable position. How are you going to continue from this pawn, this position? Yes, we need to protect our pawn, and we cannot just push forward it. It's very careless because again, king to e6 will pick it up, and that's the reason white here played king to d5. It's a very nice move. If you have spotted it, congratulations. It's a very nice move. And after something like king to g4, which was played in the game, white will simply play knight to e3, check. And after king to f4, white played a very cool move. He just retreated with his king to d4, showed that he's completely in control. And this is the moment where black resigned. In fact, there is nothing better here. For example, playing something like bishop h5 is not going to work because e7, bishop here. Now all we do is throw in a check. King moves here, and here we go. The pawn is just about to promote, and no matter what you play, for example, something like this, we're going to promote, and we are going to win his bishop, and just pick up this pawn, and that is an easy win for us. So this was a very instructive game. There were so many critical points in the game where Capablanca showed his class and won the game. For example, going all the way back, let's go all the way back to this position. This was the most critical point. Playing bishop takes d5. This move doesn't even click in my mind because you have such a beautiful looking bishop on g2. It's doing a both attacking and defensive task, and generally we are told that bishops are much stronger. But Capablanca, realizing that he can actually give black a bad bishop, went with this bishop takes d5 move, and after pawn takes, suddenly the tables are turned, and it's white who is completely better. And again, there was a beautiful transition from here on. White just kept on improving his position, just bringing his king in, and here he realized that the only good piece that black has is his rook. So all we need to do is exchange rooks, and that's all. So rook to d2 was played, and knight e3, rook b2. We are actually threatening, if the rook moves, we are actually threatening to capture and then take the bishop on b7, and that's the reason there is no way to escape the exchange. And white and black went ahead with the exchange, and after takes, this is where we just see his class. He just played g4, takes and g4, and it was completely under control of Capablanca. So very well played game. And Reshevsky at this point, this was 1936, was very young. He was a great prodigy, but very young, playing against a battle-hardened Capablanca. So, hope you've enjoyed this and found something interesting and instructive out of this game. I learned a lot from this game, and looking forward to study and analyze more games of Capablanca. So, thank you for watching, and do subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, bye.